This is a conversation with Mansoor. He's a professional wrestler, popularly known for his time in the WWE, where he was notable for being the first WWE superstar from Saudi Arabia. This conversation was recorded in the middle of a storm in New York, as you can hear, so I really apologize for all the disturbances that you might hear in the audio. In this conversation, we discuss his journey getting into WWE right from his debut. We talk about his love for wrestling and how that changed over time. We discuss the evolution of wrestling styles in Saudi Arabia. And we also do a deep dive into the creative process and how you construct a great wrestling match. This is no time. If you like what you see, then do hit subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, or rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. This project runs on your love and support. So if you'd like to see it continue, do consider making a donation on Patreon, Anchor, or Instagram. And if not through financial contributions, then do consider sharing these episodes, leaving your likes and comments. All forms of engagement, they really go a long way. For other forms of love and support, you can follow this channel on Instagram or Twitter, or follow me personally. And now, it's no time. The day is April 27, 2018. It's the greatest Royal Rumble at the Shining Jewel in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. You are standing in gorilla position. You're about to step out in your first segment as a WWE superstar in your home country, in front of your friends, in front of your family, in front of thousands of people. Let's go back to that moment. What was that feeling like? What was going through your mind as you were standing in gorilla position?
I was excited, but I was also nervous because actually at that point I wasn't a WWE superstar. I hadn't been officially signed. I had just been a part of the tryout, and they emphasized over and over, they said, this is not a contract. You're not signed full time. And actually after that, I was back home for maybe 3 months before I actually got the call saying, hey, we're picking you up and moving you to Orlando. So I sort of saw it as a job interview or not a tryout, because I already did the tryout, but this was like, all right, we've seen what he can do in the ring as a trainee. Now let's see if he has the presence and the comfort in front of an audience that really cements somebody as a great performer, as a great WWE superstar. So we went out there, we did our segment, and with the Davaris, who are amazing. And, I remember one of the things they complimented me on was I took the hands of all the other Saudi boys and I raised their arms, and we made sure to turn to all sides of the ring and finish off against the hard camera, which is the camera that's facing the most people in WWE. So I thought it went well. But at the same time, I was like, nothing's ever a guarantee in pro wrestling. But at least when I went back to the Indies soon after that, before I got signed officially, I was able to up my fee a little bit because I did the big crown jewel on the Greatest Royal Rumble show. So that was cool, but I really didn't feel the pride that I felt as a Saudi, as a Saudi, in front of my family until I had that Battle Royal match. And honestly, even then, I didn't feel real pride for my work until I had the match with Cesaro, Claudio Castagnoli, because that was the first time that I actually did a match one-on-one, bell to bell. Whereas with the Battle Royal, my presence in the match wasn't really known until maybe like 5 minutes were left. But as far as that first appearance goes, I was just elated to have finally been on the big stage. And I took it as an opportunity that ultimately kind of helped me make my way forward in my career.
How does that feeling compare with the feeling that you had a gorilla position and just before your debut on Monday Night Raw? Because like you mentioned, you had made multiple appearances for WWE by that stage. Maybe it's become slightly routine. Maybe the magic started to fade slightly. Did that feeling change when you were about to make your debut for Monday Night Raw? You mentioned it was like an interview at first, but you were elated, of course, but it didn't really sink in.
Yeah.
By your Raw debut, had that sunk in?
Well, it was different because I had done the match with the biggest Battle Royal, and then I had done the match at Crown Jewel with Cesaro, Claudio Castagnoli. And obviously those were huge, huge moments on premium live events, pay-per-view in front of 50, 60,000 people. It doesn't get bigger than that besides WrestleMania. You know what I mean? So as nervous as I felt then, I still feel nervous. I just wrestled maybe in front of 300 people at an independent show. The weekend before that, or the day before that, I wrestled in front of like 800 people. It doesn't matter how many people I'm wrestling in front. I could be wrestling in front of my wife and daughter. I'll still feel nervous because I have such a high standard for myself in my performances that like when they go wrong, like I remember having a match where I botched a move, I messed up, and I delayed on the timing of something, and I thought about that mistake for months. I still think about it, but right after it kept me up at night. I really am like I punish myself for those kinds of mistakes, and I'm always my own worst critic. So when it was finally time to come and debut on Raw, it was different because it was actually the complete opposite, essentially, of my appearances at Crown Jewel or Super Showdown in my home country, because there was no crowd. It was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we were in the Thunderdome where there's screens of people's faces and the sound is all boo, but it's the same MP3 audio file every time. I made my debut against Sheamus, and it was a different kind of nerves because this was the first time I was being thrust in front of an audience outside of my home country in terms of a wider national television audience. Now it was a test of, okay, this kid can perform in front of his hometown, his family, his friends, his people, but can he succeed in front of an American audience? I mean, Raw and SmackDown, it's worldwide, but for the most part, they were thinking, okay, let's take him outside of Saudi Arabia. How does he appear? Does he fit in on the roster? And I remember one of the first things that happened was I had the match with Sheamus and everybody was happy with it. I went to Vince McMahon, who was my boss at the time. I said, hey, what do you think? Could I have done anything better? He said, no, I loved your facial expressions, your heart, your grit. I need you to put on 20 pounds though, because you're a small, skinny guy. At the time, I was 175 pounds. So he gave me his personal trainer who he works out with. And he said, here's your diet, here's your workout regimen. And I went from 175 to like 200 pounds. Now I'm floating around 205, 210. It's hard because I'm a naturally very slim guy, very high metabolism. So I have to eat a ton of carbs and protein every single day, limited fat. I'm eating bagels. I'm eating chicken, rice.
Pancakes.
Protein pancakes my wife makes for me because she's the best. I'm drinking protein shakes basically like every hour, 2 of them sometimes at a time. So I took Raw as a test of my longevity in the business. And I was lucky enough to get maybe 2.5 years out of the main roster before I got released. So I value my time because I learned so much, and now I'm so happy because I get to go out all over the world on my own, with my own schedule and my own sort of freedom to do as I wish, with all that knowledge.
You brought up 2 very interesting points. I do have follow-up questions for you. One, you mentioned about how your Monday Night Raw debut is a way of testing whether you succeed in front of an American audience. We'll come back to that. Let's park that question. First, you mentioned that you set such a high standard for yourself. In a previous interview, you had mentioned that after the greatest Royal Rumble, you remember thinking to yourself, I've got this moment. If tomorrow things go downhill from here, the fact that I just had this opportunity in this moment, this is the world to me. And then you mentioned the same interview that next day you woke up and you were like, okay, what's next? What's next, right? Like,
100% not true. I'm always thinking what's next.
Yeah, exactly. In the same interview, you mentioned that feeling just lasts one day. Yeah. Do you think this is a challenge for people in your line of work where every single time where you have a moment, you always start thinking about the next big thing? In a way, it's like the curse of greatness, right? You'll never settle. You'll never be comfortable with where you are. You're always thinking about what's next. How can I get even bigger? How can I go even higher? Is this like a struggle? Is it a challenge for you as well?
Oh, 100%. I can tell you right now, Seth Rollins wants to be Roman Reigns. I can tell you Roman Reigns wants to be John Cena. I can tell you John Cena wants to be The Rock. And The Rock, God, I don't know what he wants, but I'm sure there's more that he wants. They wouldn't be in their position if it wasn't for the fact that they weren't satisfied with what they have. And like you said, it is sort of that curse of greatness. God, I every single time I had something, I was like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And my wife would say, just settle down and be thankful for what you have. Yeah. And then we can move. Nope, can't do it. I'm at night. I'm in my bed tossing and turning, thinking of promos, matches, ideas, characters, gimmicks, pitches. It's just kind of, and I don't think I'll ever stop until I retire. And then even when I retire, my dream is to teach at a school or work in creative, because I always want to be around the business. I love it so much. Sometimes you feel like it doesn't love you back. It's kind of a weird relationship where so many wrestlers are just in love with this thing that sometimes just breaks you down physically, spiritually, mentally, but you can't get away from it. It's like an abusive relationship, but when it's great, there's nothing like it.
Let's touch upon, you're giving me so many interesting things, so many follow questions. Let's touch upon that. Is there a part of you that misses not being able to watch wrestling as just a fan? Because now that you worked in the industry, you have, in a way, it's like finding out the secret of a magic trick. Like you find out how an illusion's performed. And of course, there's a very popular saying that never make your passion or your hobby your profession, because then it becomes work, right? So you're putting in your long hours, physical, mental effort. There's backstage politics. All of that starts to corrode the original passion for the industry that you had. Is there a part of you that, like, now when you sit down and you put on a wrestling show, it misses the fact that you can't just watch wrestling, something you love so purely, as just a fan, because you know so much about the industry, your mind's always going to go there?
Yeah, 100%. it's brutal because whenever I watch wrestling now, I just get angry or
Yeah.
upset because I'll see. I'm gonna sound so bitter, but I'll see some of the worst wrestling. I'll see some of the worst promos, and like especially when I was working. Now that I'm out, it's so much more freeing because I can just watch and be like, oh, cool. When I worked there and I wasn't on TV and I was either kept home or backstage, and I knew that I had the capability and the talent to do great things, particularly from a character and verbal communicative aspect. When I would see people go out there and just the performances were not compelling. And it would just make me boil inside. The metaphor I always use are
Under ice, right? Trying to break out
yes,
of it.
you're
Yeah.
under ice and you just can't find a hole. And meanwhile, you can see people walking by and you're like, God, just why am I not up there? It's brutal, but you can't take it personally because how good you are really doesn't matter. It's just a matter of, are you in the right place at the right time? And are you ready for the opportunity that they give you when they're ready to give it to you? That's what I always say. I just said it. I did a seminar. I did a class for a bunch of wrestling trainees. And what I basically told them is you guys are going to have to get as good as you possibly can be. So in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, 20 years, when you finally get that opportunity in front of a big crowd, you're ready. It's not going to come to you the moment that you get ready. It's going to come either a day after or 10 years after. That's just the reality of the situation. And that's why for me at 28 years old, it's kind of no sour grapes about getting released because God, I'm so happy I can go out there. I've met people that have connected me with other people. And finally, I feel like even though I was in the largest professional wrestling company in the world for 5 years with the biggest audience and the most outreach, I feel like I've made more meaningful connections than I have now outside of WWE than I did in it. I remember after I got released, I put out just like a 1-minute video of me cutting a short promo, promoting myself, saying, hey, in 90 days, I'll be available for bookings. And people, I was in the company for 5 years and hundreds of people were telling me, I didn't know you could talk. I didn't know you could cut a promo like that. I didn't know you had charisma or charm. And I was like, God, that's brutal. You know what I mean? But I'm happy now because people are getting to see that and who knows where I'll go next. But to speak to your point, to go back to what you were asking, when your hobby becomes your profession, it can kill your love for it. But at the same time, I have to say, when I come away from a match that I am truly proud of, it is a greater sense of fulfillment and joy than I ever had as a fan. To be able to create what I appreciated as a fan for fans. That's why my philosophy in wrestling was always, I want to create a moment. I don't necessarily want to build myself up as a star. I want to create moments and matches and segments and moments for other people where fans will be able to say until the day that they die, until the day that they're put underground, I remember that moment and I will remember it for the rest of my life. I think that's how we live. We live through memories and we live through moments that are repeated on video until human civilization ends. Not necessarily to say that my biggest goal in my life is to be remembered. What I mean to say rather is that if I watch The Undertaker in a casket get hit by a bolt of lightning and it explodes into flames, then he kicks down the door and hits everybody with choke slams. If I can provide that, whatever the equivalent of that is for any child or person on earth, then I feel I will have done my job.
You want to create these moments. The Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, he once said that, I'm going to go out there and give you a show that you've never seen before. Why? Because I can. You've always said that you were born to do this. Is there a specific moment in your life, a specific memory when you realize this is what I was born to do? This is what has meant, this is my life's calling. Yeah, I remember. So I was a big wrestling fan as a kid. And then right around the time of like Eddie Guerrero passed away, the horrible tragedy with the Benoit family. And I fell out of wrestling. I fell out of love with wrestling. A lot of people, I think, around like their teenage years tend to just kind of drift away. And then my older brother, Trip Loon, who has a band back in Saudi Arabia and a whole like entertainment company. I'm so proud of him. He became a fan because of CM Punk. And he was like, dude, you got to check out CM Punk and Daniel Bryan. These guys are awesome. And I was like, I haven't watched wrestling in a long time. Okay. I check it out. Totally love Punk. Totally love Bryan. A lot of my favorites are still there, like Kane and Undertaker. All those guys I remember. And then new people I appreciate, like Dolph Ziggler, I was a big fan of. Cesaro, I was a big fan of. Once I got back into it, I was like, okay,
because I had done a lot of acting in my life. I enjoyed performing, but I always felt like there was something missing in acting. I liked doing plays. I liked directing. I liked writing, but it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was my passion. And if something like acting or creating theater isn't your passion, you really shouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean? Because it's one of those. It's like wrestling. If wrestling isn't your passion, why are you doing it? I mean, it's a thankless job, and you're probably not going to make any money until you do one day. So I was like, well, what do I really want to do? I want to be in the professional wrestling world. I love this. I didn't think I could be a wrestler. I thought I would be a manager, a referee, a writer. I actually applied to be an intern at WWE headquarters when I was like 17, 16 years old. And then when I was 17 or 18, I remember I watched Daniel Bryan and John Cena, SummerSlam 2013, when Daniel Bryan won the WWE Championship. And I said, oh my God, here's this guy that everybody said would never be successful in WWE. Everybody said Vince was going to hate this guy. He's never going to be anything. He's never going to amount to anything, even though he's incredibly talented. It doesn't matter, because in WWE, it doesn't matter how good you are. And I saw him beat John Cena, the number one guy, the most protected guy in the company, clean as a whistle, for the top prestigious championship in our sport. And I was like, hey, if I get good enough at this thing, I think I could do it. And part of it was like, I'm not short, but I'm a skinny Arab who historically, that group of people haven't really done particularly well in wrestling, or weren't really presented in a great light. And then around that same time, I watched Sami Zayn perform in NXT, and he had Zayn written on his tights. And I remember thinking, that's the first time I've ever seen Arabic written on anyone's gear. And he was presented in a positive light, and he was a babyface. He was a good guy. And the fact that he was Arab didn't really dominate his personality. It simply was a crucial piece of who he is as a person. Yeah. And I thought maybe there is hope for me, in the sense that maybe there is something that I can do in this field where my background won't actually hinder me. Ironically enough, it's what got me my job. Yeah. But also, it did kind of hinder me as well. It was kind of a double-edged sword, to tell you the truth. But I'm sure you have questions about that.
I do.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, you open up so many doors for me to start going down.
I apologize.
Okay, let's talk about the love for wrestling, which is the premise of the question. Let's go back even further. In 2003, you were at a tutor's house where the son was watching SmackDown on the television.
Yes.
And he was watching the Iron Man match between Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. Yeah. And that was one of the first wrestling matches that you remember watching. From there, your brother Talal pulled you into wrestling, and you spent days playing No Mercy, on Nintendo 64, SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. When you look back now on those days, are you able to pinpoint what it was about wrestling that pulled you in at that young age, that sucked you in completely and made a fan out of you?
I think it's just modern, gladiatorial combat. In the same sense that I was a fan of like the Power Rangers. Here was the Power Rangers essentially, but in the form of real people in front of a real crowd every single week live. Well, it wasn't live, obviously, because I was watching it in Saudi Arabia, but still, like there's just nothing like it. There's nothing like it. It's like watching a superhero movie in real life. It's like the uniqueness of wrestling, of pro wrestling. The reason why there's so many fans is because you can't get it anywhere else. Pro wrestling competes with real sports. I mean, basketball, football, of course, American football, soccer, whatever. Rugby. We're competing with other entertainment. We're competing with people going to see concerts and shows and movies. But at the same time, any one of those things is nothing like pro wrestling. There just isn't anything like it. The closest I can even compare it to is like a musical on Broadway. Yeah. Like that's the closest thing I can compare it to. But really, in its essence, it's the only thing you can see of that kind of thing. One take, fight choreography, wild, fantastic characters, passionate monologues, storylines from a week-to-week standpoint, like a serialized television show. Yeah. It's so incredibly unique, and I think that's why it draws so many people in. What was your original question?
That was it. I think you did answer what originally drew you into wrestling.
Oh, just how unique it is. And I had never seen anything like it in my life.
I agree. Let's map that out with what you mentioned earlier about how you had a falling out with wrestling. You fell off, didn't follow it as much. And then your brother Talal once again pulled you in with CM Punk's pipe bomb promo. Then you watched Brandon Bryan versus John Cena and you thought to yourself, I can do this. Over this period, when you first fell in love with it and then you came back to wrestling, did that change the way you viewed wrestling? Did you fall in love with it for a different reason? When you came back to it, did you now fall in love because you viewed it as a business? You mentioned you applied as an intern as well. You were more interested in the creative side until you watched that match. Were you now more interested in it as a business, as a creative, as an art form, or do you think you still gravitated towards it because it was gladiatorial combat, like you mentioned?
No, definitely it changed for sure. Because as I got older, I started to question the creative decisions.
Yeah.
I would get on the internet more and find forums and chat rooms where we'd talk about wrestling and complain about what was going on and who was getting pushed and presented well and who wasn't.
Yeah.
I became a smart mark, but as a kid, you just go, oh no, my favorite guy lost. Oh well, like, oh no, oh yay, my favorite guy won. It doesn't matter. And plus my favorite guy was the Undertaker, so he almost never lost. Yeah, I remember we were in Dubai with my father and my mother, and I ordered WrestleMania and I watched it live with my dad. It must have been at like 3 a.m. And I saw that was the WrestleMania where Undertaker wrestled Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship. Yeah. And I was literally jumping up and down on the couch while my dad was watching, smiling, because I was so excited for every single false finish and every near fall, every kick out of the Batista bomb, every kick out of the choke slam. Yeah. It made me lose my mind. So you kind of lose that childlike innocence when you're watching and all you can think about is what are the business decisions going behind this and what are the creative decisions going behind this. And that's why I think it's so important for people who truly love pro wrestling to expand their horizons and not just watch WWE or not just watch AEW, but check out a lot of the independent promotions or even the historical. Go back and watch old Ring of Honor, PWG, Dragon Gate USA, CZW, all kinds of professional wrestling for Chikara. They've told incredible stories that are going to be lost to time if dedicated fans didn't prioritize putting all that up on the internet. So, yeah. And as I get older, like I said, it's such a contradiction because I will say that Daniel Bryan winning the WWE Championship proved to me that if you're good enough, you will succeed. At the same time, I always tell the students that I talk to, it really doesn't matter how good you are. What matters is how good you are when you get the chance to show how good you are.
Yeah.
So I think for Daniel Bryan, those moments were picked. And he benefited from being the best wrestler in the world, the times when he was allowed to be the best wrestler in the world. In my experience in WWE, it's very difficult to get that opportunity where they say, let loose. I got that chance with Cesaro, and that might be it. In terms of maybe. Yeah. A little bit, yeah. But, you know, that match, I'm very proud of that match because unless I'm wrong, I think it was the first time two Muslims wrestled each other on pay-per-view.
Yeah, very cool.
At the same time, it was supposed to be longer, but then there was a lot of like fun stuff that happened at the end of the match, which was great. But as far as a match goes, like I think if we had like 3, 4, 5 more minutes, it would have really put it over the edge into being like awesome. Like I remember actually we followed Edge versus Seth Rollins, Hell in a Cell, which was like a 5-star match. They absolutely killed each other with everything. And me and Mustafa looked at each other like, we're gonna go out there and work a wrist lock, headlock. And I was so happy that the crowd was like, great. I think we reset after all the weapons and high spots and crazy stuff that happened in Hell in a Cell. We just took it back down to pro wrestling. And I'm so happy that the crowd was with it because it could have been completely dead and then it would have been over.
Yeah, that can make or break it. Yeah,
100%.
Just to your original point, even I had a similar phase of disillusionment, like a disenchantment with WWE. Like I was a huge fan. And then when I found out it was scripted, like I fell away from it slightly. And even the booking decision didn't agree with them. And then I remember I was pulled back into wrestling in SummerSlam 2009, which is DX's final run when they came back. Yeah. And then I was hooked on for a different reason because now I knew it was scripted. So I was viewing it as an art form. An art form, exactly. Like a very unique form of entertainment, like you mentioned. And because I knew it was scripted, I was respecting it for a different reason altogether, right? And then I was a fan from there on. Let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about Saudi. Is it surreal to you that over the last 5 years, Saudi's become this hub for global sporting events? Because I just mentioned to you earlier as well that when I grew up in the Middle East, it was unthinkable for me that the Middle East would have these type of events and these type of stars would come there. Now in Saudi, you have WWE's been hosting events, UFC is going to start hosting events, Formula One is there, the biggest football stars are moving there. You're also going to have the biggest boxing matches in Saudi. To me, this was unimaginable. This is like the most ambitious crossover you can ever think of. Is it surreal to you or did you always see that coming?
No, it's surreal. I remember being a kid watching SmackDown and thinking, God, I don't think I'm ever going to get to see this in my life in person. And that's kind of a depressing thought. But I remember when I was doing the shows and I would see kids in the crowd, I go, God, I'm so happy. Yeah. I'm so happy they get to see this in person. Yeah. You know what I mean? But when you just look at like, not just the entertainment stuff, but how much the country has changed. Like I remember when I was a kid, I don't even remember this, but my mom told me about it because she's American. When I was a baby, I got sick, but my dad was at work. She couldn't drive me to the pharmacy. She walked me to the pharmacy. It was pouring rain. And I guess she wasn't wearing a hijab. So she went to the pharmacy and got the medicine. And then she was approached by religious police, Mutawa. And the police was basically like, you got to put a hijab on. Like you're uncovered. My mom was like, I don't have to do anything. I'm an American. And he pointed a gun at her and said, you got to cover up. And what my mom ended up doing is we went back home. She called his supervisor and got him fired. So that was the way that my mom was. She's a very headstrong, independent woman. She was in the military. Her and Saudi Arabia did not mix at all. And that's probably why we moved ultimately. But when we went back, God, it was just so different. I mean, there's boys and girls going on dates. Yeah. I knew a guy when I was a kid living there. I knew a guy who was put in the back of a van and lashed because he was out with a girl who wasn't his sister's cousin or, any relation. So to not only see that, but to see men and women sitting together, watching sporting events or entertainment shows or going to the movie theater, that is pretty crazy to me. And that's great. I'm so happy that people get the opportunity to have fun and be entertained.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible in the next decade we might see a very different style of pro wrestling, an Arab style, a Saudi style, a Middle Eastern style? Because I find it very interesting. Mexico took pro wrestling and they created lucha libre.
Yeah.
Japan took pro wrestling. They created a very distinctive style of their own. Do you think it's possible we might see a Saudi style, a Middle Eastern style? And if your answer is yes, what might it look like?
When I look at sort of the lay of the land as far as like what fans in the Middle East kind of look at, it's difficult because I definitely think WWE doing shows in Saudi Arabia has renewed a lot of interest in wrestling, and I see promotions popping up all over. There's WrestleFest in Dubai, there's SPW in Saudi Arabia, QPW in I think Bahrain. No, that's Qatar. QPW is in Qatar. Kingdom Pro Wrestling is in Bahrain.
Yeah.
And all kinds of promotions. I mean, they've been around a while, but now that wrestling's in the region, people are like, oh wow, I can be a wrestler. Like I'm gonna go to these places and train.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really cool. As far as the style goes, it's difficult because it's hard for me to imagine what kind of new style there is. I mean, lucha libre is obviously distinct. The UK has a technical sort of gritty aspect. American is all pageantry and characters and showmanship.
Yeah.
Japan is strong style, right? They just beat the out of each other. So I'm trying to think like what would be a new special kind of style, maybe a synthesis, a fusion. I think with Arab fans, definitely I feel like they would, as Chris Hero likes to say, North American, or rather just American pro wrestling is a morality play. It's good versus evil, right? Crowds like to see a good guy versus a bad guy, and the bad guy cheats to win, or the good guy overcomes and is victorious. And I feel probably in the Middle East with our culture, I think we might try to see a similar thing because there is a heavy sense of honor, morality, doing the right thing, being a man, or being the best example of a man or woman you can possibly be. So it kind of reminds me of like Puerto Rico in the sense that bad guys in Puerto Rico would just be despised because there's such a high standard of how you're supposed to act as a decent human being in Middle Eastern countries because of the heavy emphasis on Islam, religion, and of course, upholding your honor. And obviously your family name is very important. So I wonder if there's an aspect of like that kind of storytelling where it's not so much about the moves, but it's about the good versus evil aspect of it that fans can really attach onto.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I would love to see that type of a style evolve in more, where the morality, the moral compass is amplified a bit more. A tangent I want to take from this, and this is something you brought up earlier as well, which was the point about whether you would succeed in front of an American audience. We talk about your Monday Night Raw debut. Let's go back to it. When you were young, I believe your father took you to a wrestling show, and there was this foreign heel character called the Sheikh.
Oh, this was way before I was born. I mean, this was like the 70s or the 80s.
Oh, so this is when your father
went
on his own.
He was in college.
All right, he went on his own and he watched this wrestling show where there was a Sheikh was performing by an Italian guy, and it was this stereotypical foreign heel gimmick, right? It was played by an Italian guy. And he came out thinking that this sport will never respect your people the right way, will never treat them the right way. I also want to add to that something you mentioned in a previous interview about how sometimes you've struggled with the sense of identity, in the sense that you felt that maybe you're too Arab for the Americans or too American for the Arabs as well. How difficult is it for you to create a gimmick or a persona that's the perfect combination where you have a nod and an acknowledgement to your roots in Saudi. You're quite proud of that heritage, but you don't want to fall down that trap of creating that same stereotypical foreign heel, especially in an industry where you mentioned anyone who's not from America is immediately the heel, immediately booed. Like Rusev, his entire gimmick was he's Russian and he's booed for that reason. A lot of Canadian wrestlers, even though it's just North America, are just booed for that reason. The Iron Sheik, the Great Khali, Gunther initially as well. All of them were vilified and hated just because they were not American. How challenging is it for you to create that gimmick where you want to have the connection to Saudi, to the Middle East, but also create something totally unique?
It's tough because, the thing about guys like Gunther is that he's naturally a heel. And I think just him being foreign escalates the perception of the character because to the average person, being different is scary.
Yeah.
Right. But I look at a guy like Shinsuke Nakamura and I go, oh, he's easily a babyface. You know what I mean? I think we are at least in modern times a little more accepting of foreign babyfaces. Yeah. But when it's time to turn on the I'm an evil foreign guy, it's easy to just switch that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Shinsuke did it. All these guys did it. But I think it depends on how you present yourself. So the problem, I think, with me is that as a babyface where my gimmick was that, hey, I'm the guy from Saudi Arabia, there wasn't really anything for Americans to latch on to. You know, Shinsuke had an awesome entrance. He had a great style. Yeah. He had a lot of work in Japan where people can go and watch that and see how big of a star he was. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was just like, oh, here's this upstart, but also he's not from here. So really, you have no reason to like this guy. You've never seen him on TV. He's not from here. You can't relate to him. So that's why I think I really enjoyed the storyline I did with Mustafa Ali because it endeared me to the audience in the sense that, oh, he's like a little kid. He's just like me. Or he's just like my little brother. He just wants to do the best he can. And he has this mentor who's bitter and grumpy and wants to just harden those edges and make him a more cynical person. But he just has so much energy and he's such a blue chipper that it added another dimension, I think, to the character that I really enjoyed. And even with people poo-poo on the maximum male model stuff, but I enjoyed it because it was such a complete departure from what I was doing before that I got to show a certain amount of range that I think I never would have gotten to otherwise. And I when I got released, I had more people reach out to me offering stuff and offering connections and bookings and opportunities because they enjoyed the maximum male model so much. They were like, dude, I know you can take anything they give you. Same thing goes with my partner, Mace. Anything they give you, you're going to give 100% and you're going to make the most out of it. And that's what's great about a professional wrestler. So I'm glad that I did it because it gave me a lot of opportunities. As far as like a foreign heel goes, my father, he told me when I told him I was going to be a pro wrestler, he was like, it's not for us. And, I remember when I had that Battle Royal match, that was when he was like, okay, I get it. And then I had the match with Cesaro and he was like, now I really get it. Because the Battle Royal was this great moment. I jumped into the arms of my father and my brother, but he didn't really understand the beauty of pro wrestling until I had that match with Cesaro where he was literally standing on his feet going, oh my, whoa, like who's going to win? You know what I mean? So I'm happy I got to do it. I'm it's tough because like you said earlier, too American to be Saudi, too Saudi to be American. God, I see things all the time where people in America are like, oh, he's from Saudi Arabia, whatever. And I see Saudis who go, look at him. He's not representing us correctly. And at this point, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be proud of where I come from. And if I'm not living up to the standards of what you think I should be living up to, that's fine. Because I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm going to provide for my family while having fun doing my dream job. And at this point, that's really all that matters to me. Now that I'm not in a multi-billion-dollar company representing a multi-billion-dollar deal between a country and a mega corporation, I can finally breathe easy and I can do something crazy like I did last night at a bar. I don't even drink. I don't smoke. I've never done anything. But I wrestled at a bar with no ring in a hardcore match with a guy. And I had a blast because I just, that's what I want to do. I want to have fun. And if I get compensated enough to support my family, that's really all that matters to me.
Did you start to feel the weight of being the first Saudi Arabian WWE superstar? Like once you got out of it, did you start to see like the certain pressure that's off you that you didn't know was weighing you down?
I still feel it a little bit because I have such a high standard for myself that I do feel bad when people are like, I saw a comment that was like, because I did an interview where I said after the match with Mustafa, Vince pulled me into his office and said, hey, the Saudis, they don't really want you on the shows anymore, or at least they don't care if you're on it. If you're on it, cool. If you're not, whatever. They just want big stars.
Big stars, yeah.
And I remember somebody said, well, that doesn't surprise me. Like Mansoor cut these awful Arabic promos. Like all the Saudis were like laughing at him. And I was like, that kind of, it's probably true. You know, like I did my best to pronounce the things. I made a couple errors, and it's tough because, you know, English, I learned Arabic at a young age, but once I moved, you know, my dad stayed in Saudi Arabia. So it was just me and my American mom and my sisters. And I just, you know, I can read and write it. I just have a hard time in conversation. And there were little, you know, the problem is if I was from any other Middle Eastern country and I performed in Saudi Arabia, it'd be like, oh, okay, cool. But it's the fact that I was their boy, that the standard was so high. So I was never going to live up to that role. And I've kind of had to deal with that my whole life. Too American to be Saudi, too Saudi to be American. And at a certain point, I just had to kind of understand that really the only thing that matters is that I'm a good enough father and a good enough husband and a good enough brother and a good enough son and a good enough professional wrestler.
No, that's a great outlook. While we're talking about Saudi, Mansoor, let's set the record straight. Why is the Middle East obsessed with the Undertaker?
Dude, and the fact that the rumor that he converted to Islam, like that the Undertaker is now a Muslim and he goes by Muhammad. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's because I think it's like what I told you before. I think culturally in the Middle East, it's a morality play where we expect there to be characters, good and evil. And the Undertaker is such a fantastical, larger than life character. And usually, at least when I was a kid, he was a good guy. So he was a force of good, of sort of almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? Dramatic good. Like the man calls lightning from the sky. Yeah. It's almost like religious in the sense that he can cast miracles and do all these crazy things against evil. And I think that's what sort of like speaks to Middle Eastern people and Arabs and people, even in India, I feel like, or Pakistan, or these cultures look at the Undertaker and go, wow, here's this big imposing guy who has magical powers. And he's also an incredible professional wrestler. It's like all the things mix into one, where you just have this perfect encapsulation of what we think is really cool as a culture. And which is funny because when I was growing up in Saudi Arabia, we had a ministry, I think, to combat witchcraft. Here was the Undertaker on live TV doing witchcraft. So I don't know. I met him. He's really cool. So
were you nervous when you met him?
Yeah, I was. Oh yeah, big time. The only two people I was nervous to meet, I actually didn't meet Christian because he's like one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Yeah. But I felt like I had to meet Undertaker because like Christian was like on the other side of the room and I was about to leave and I was like, he's talking to Edge. Like, I feel bad if I interrupt and I'm also nervous. Yeah. But with Undertaker, I was like, hey, it's very nice to meet you, sir. I actually met him in Saudi Arabia when he was there for a match. Yeah. And I can confirm that, in fact, he is not Muslim. He is Christian, but
did he burn Kane? Did he kill his? Did he
burn down the house? He murdered his parents. Yeah, not very Christian of him to burn his parents.
We all believe that when you're playing the wrestling cards. Do you know he burned down his house?
I think actually they wrote a book about the fictional history of Kane and the Undertaker. I don't know if it exists, but I'm pretty sure I heard about it. I might try and find it.
We used to talk about it all the time. He's like, oh, Undertaker, remember he burned down his house. That's his brother.
And I loved Kane too. I thought Kane was bad. I loved Kane.
Both of them, yeah. What a character, you're right. Undertaker is such a singular character where he's reached out across so many regions and he connects with every single person. Even though the gimmick itself is like, it's like you said, it's like an evil persona, whatever, like it's an otherworldly, supernatural person, but still people connect with and love him so much. Yeah. Such a unique character. I do want to pick your brains about the business as well, about the creative side. You have such a brilliant creative mind about the business.
Thank you.
In a previous interview, you had mentioned once that, and this is a very interesting insight, that you said Vince McMahon has watched so much wrestling by now that he's probably jaded with it, which is probably why he gravitates towards the crazy ideas now, because that's what excites him now. You have performed under both Vince McMahon's regime and Triple H's regime. What are some of the big differences that you've noticed in the way they create shows? What are some insights that you've taken out of the way they operate shows?
I think it's tough because I really wish I got to talk to Hunter more. I didn't really get the chance to talk to him. I talked to Vince a lot. The problem is when you talk to Vince is you could talk to him for 45 minutes to an hour and walk away thinking it was a great conversation. And then a day later you go, oh, wait, he didn't really say anything to me at all. Like Vince is like, oh, that's great. That's great. We'll definitely consider it. Yeah, no. Wow. Great idea. Let me read this. Oh, yeah. Kind of like this. And you'll be like, wow, he really loves it. And then a month later, nothing happens. I think he's just like, he's really good at making talent appeasing talent is Vince. But you never know. Occasionally, like for example, Nikki Cross, that Nikki ASH superhero gimmick was totally her idea. She had a binder with like sketch designs and ideas for the character. She gave it to Vince. 6 months later, they called her up and said, "Hey, Vince read your pitch. We're doing it." So you never know what's going to hit off with him, and you never know. Well, you do know 95% of the time that whatever you pitch is going to get. Like I remember being told by somebody who had been in WWE, "Hey, listen, don't fall for his lies," because like the guy was talking to me and he was like, he told me I was going to be tag team champion. I never was a damn tag team champion. So yeah, because with Vince, it's like if he tells you the plan is you guys are going to win the belts at the next pay-per-view, and then it doesn't happen, what are you going to do? You're going to go up to him and say, you know what I mean? Some guys do that. Guys who are much more important and more well paid than me. But yeah, I didn't really get to talk to Hunter much. The times I did get to talk to Hunter were like creatively. I actually had a little dispute with him, which I thought was great because I love hashing it out with people creatively. I'm like not difficult to work with, I hope. But I tried to explain my point, which was we had a match with the New Day, and we had LA Knight, who was Max Dupree at the time, as our manager. And the story they were telling was that he was getting increasingly frustrated with how much we were losing because we kept modeling. He was like, "You guys gotta stop modeling and start winning matches," which is funny because he started the freaking modeling promotion.
It's a fair point, I think.
Whatever. So Hunter's note was, "I want New Day to beat you guys," and then Max Dupree or LA Knight gets angry and throws his coat down and storms off. And I was like, okay, what can we do in this match to tell that story so that it's not just a match and then a post-match angle that are completely separate? So my idea was we start to beat the New Day and it looks like we're going to win. And we get so cocky. I have Mace pick up a camera, one of the like cameras, and film me posing on Kofi. And then as he's holding the camera, he gets drop kicked and then I get rolled up and you see it from Mace's perspective. What ended up happening was Maxine gets a camera, she's flashing it, we're posing, and then we lose. And I remember Hunter saying, "Yeah, that's cool and all, but don't you think you guys look stupid?" And I was like, "Hunter, we're the maximum male models." Like, yeah, of course we look stupid.
That's the point.
My name's Mansoor. His name's Marseille. My argument to Hunter, and I think to his fairness, he did kind of get it, and we all ended up ultimately doing it because of this. But I said, listen, if we're losing, I would rather we lose because of something we did than just because we stink and we got beat. If we have an excuse that we lost, which is we were overconfident and we're too busy modeling, then not only does it say, okay, well, they can wrestle the New Day again and they'll have a claim to say, we would have won last time if it wasn't for the fact that we got busy modeling. But the second point is we lost because we were modeling, giving Max Dupree more of an impetus to get angry with us. And I think that's when Hunter was like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay, we can do something like that. And I was so glad that because I feel like with Vince, it would have been, Hunter was actually there to have that conversation. Vince was never in the bowl. He was never around the ring for rehearsals. So anytime you wanted to change something, no matter how minuscule it was, you had to tell your producer would run to Vince, talk to Vince, come back, say no. And then you did whatever they asked you to. So that's what I like. I like when it's a collaborative process. So yeah, I enjoyed working for Hunter in that sense. I just wish I had more access to him. I think it's tough because when he took over as booker, everybody wanted to talk to him. Everybody wanted to get a feel about how their career was going to go under this new regime. And sadly, I think, when Vince came back, there was some butting heads and some weird stuff happened with our character where they had to kill our gimmick because they were worried it was going to offend people. Well, not people, but some very powerful people. Mm-hmm. So we were gone. And then I think when cuts happened, it was just like, these guys are on TV. You know what I mean? So sadly, that's the way it works. But yeah, I had fun. And at the end of the day, like WWE, they do financially take care of their talent pretty well as far as on the main roster, at least. So mortgages paid off, cars are paid off. So I'm happy about that.
Happy about that. Yeah, no, very interesting insights. Such brilliant minds, both Triple H and Vince McMahon, but two different minds and two different personalities.
Definitely.
And it's so interesting how their personality seeps into the show that they start creating. Like I remember when Triple H was in charge of NXT, that you could tell this is Hunter's show.
Oh, that's his baby.
Yeah, that's his baby. And you could start seeing the way he started planning the shows because he always used to be very huge on entrances and everyone had a very well thought out entrance. I remember.
Oh, he's huge on it. Yes.
Yeah. I remember like Finn Balor, like the way it was thought out. And then there was a video that came out about Hunter doing Finn Balor's entrance, crawling on the floor. And I thought that was insane.
He was always out there, like with talent.
Very hands-on.
I thought that was cool. I thought that was really cool. The only time I ever saw Vince out there for rehearsals were twice.
Maximum Male Models.
That, and also, of course, when he helped us do our debut as the Maximum Male Models. And then also, there was a pandemic segment in the PC where Sheamus was doing a urine test on Jeff Hardy because he had just, I guess, crashed a car on TV or something. And he was like, take this urine test to see if you're drunk. And Jeff he goes behind a curtain, pees in the cup. Of course, it's not real pee. And he brings the cup to Sheamus and he says, hey, Sheamus, it's better to be pissed off than pissed on, and throws the pee in his face. And I remember Vince coming down and being like, and then you say, better to be pissed off than pissed on. He just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. That's Vince's sense of humor. Pee, poop, fart, slime, mud, dropping on people. So those were the two things. Those were the two times I saw him the most happy. Was doing our modeling segment and the pee segment with Sheamus and Jeff Hardy.
So now you know how to appease Vince. You mentioned something interesting, and this will be the final big question, I guess, is how do you go about constructing a good wrestling match? And I know this is a very unfair question. It's quite vague as well. Let's assume that you've been feuding with someone for the past few months. You've got 15 minutes on a pay-per-view. I know this is still vague. Like, you need to know what the storyline was about to be actually able to construct the match. But what I want to pick your brains on is, what are the main questions that you're trying to answer when you're given 15 minutes as a blank canvas? How do you go about constructing a match and then planning the moves and the story that you're trying to tell?
So typically what I do actually is, I think a lot of people work backwards. They like to do their finish and then figure out what comes next. I kind of like to go for the first step because in my mind, the things that I do in the beginning of the match have to pay off and affect the later part of the match, or else what was the point? You have to reward people for watching your match. You have to reward people who give you their attention, because attention is so sparse nowadays. Sparse? I don't know. Attention is so sparse nowadays that if people are to give you 15 minutes of their time that they could be spending on their phone, they could be spending on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, but they're just looking at you for 15 minutes, which is such an incredibly valuable amount of time to receive someone's attention. You have to reward them for paying attention. So that's why if I ever have a match longer than 8 minutes, I always try to put things in the beginning of the match that pay off. I always try to make sure that whenever a heel outsmarts me and cuts me off because he cheats, that later in the match, he tries to do the same thing and I outsmart him. I always try to make sure that if somebody takes my leg out or takes my arm out, later in the match, I try to go for a move. There's my arm. Always pay it off. I always try to do something where if the heel kicks me in the face 3 times, when I run my comeback, I kick him in the face 4 times just to pay it back towards him. Always reward the audience for paying attention. And I think always pay back what was done to you onto your opponent. If you're a babyface, onto a heel.
Yeah, that's great advice. Which was the greatest match in WWE history?
History?
Yes. Unfair questions.
God. So for me personally, this is probably not the greatest match in history. I'll give you my top 5. I'll give you my top 5 matches that I love.
Mm-hmm.
Batista and Taker at WrestleMania, I think 23 or 2.
One of them, right? 2 or 3, yeah.
I love that match. I love John Cena and Umaga at the Royal Rumble. It was a last man standing match. I think that was 06, maybe 05. I love that match quite a bit. Daniel Bryan and John Cena, SummerSlam 2013. Sami Zayn and Adrian Neville, now Pac. This was TakeOver. God, I don't remember which TakeOver, but it was also, I think, in 2013-14.
Around that time.
And then my 5th, wow, this is tough. There's so many to choose from. Maybe I would say, and I'm doing a disservice to all the people who watched the Attitude Era, because that wasn't really my time. You know what I mean? So I didn't really see those matches when they happened. I'm just thinking about matches that meant a lot to me and kind of influenced my style. I think Christian and Randy Orton had an amazing match that's very underrated. I believe it was Over the Limit, 2012 or maybe 2011. 2011, I think, or 2010. The early 2010s that I really, really enjoyed. But I enjoyed that match more as a wrestler now than I enjoyed it as a fan back then. That's one of the first matches that oh God. And I also have to give a shout out to one of my favorite matches of all time. Brock Lesnar and Daniel Bryan, Survivor Series 2019, I think. One of the rare heel matches in WWE history. And yet, what an incredible story they told. To me, this is a 5-star match because it was one of the only matches I've ever seen along with Okada and Shibata at Dominion in New Japan. I don't remember what year it was. That made me forget that wrestling was fake. As a wrestler,
yeah,
I was watching that like, and Brock Lesnar is the best at that because he kind of is just out there doing stuff for real. But he's one of the best sellers of all time. Danielson had Brock Lesnar in the yes lock, the label lock, and you could literally see Brock turning purple. Yeah. And every time he took a Busaiku knee or got kicked in the knot, like he was selling that like he is so incredibly good at that. And it means so much because he's such a monster and because he dominates so much of the match that when something happens to him, he doesn't need a million false finishes or near falls. The 3 or 2 that he does make the crowd explode. That's Goldberg, Brock Lesnar had, oh my God, that match was amazing at WrestleMania. Like it didn't need to be any longer than it was. It is exactly what it needed to be. I'm going way longer than 5 matches, but those are just matches that I use as examples of look at these guys and look how they work.
Fantastic. It's a tough question, of course, like how do you even rank so many great matches in WWE history? Fantastic. Before we move into our final questions, I would love it if you can interpret what I've built with the Lego.
Oh my God.
What do you think these masterpieces are?
This is interesting. To me, this looks like perhaps some kind of utopia.
That's what I was going for.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're ribbing me.
Yeah.
Like a city in the sky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like one of those, like you see it in like a Studio Ghibli movie. Like a fantastical setting. Like
it's something Saudi might build, right? So,
that's true.
What?
What's that new city? Neom or something? They're building
the one that's like a mile long.
Yeah. Like I see Roman columns here. Yeah, this is very interesting. And then this is like maybe a water tower. I grew up around one of those.
Wow.
And then this, interesting. So there's the propeller at the top.
Seems in the flavor.
Yeah, this could be a flying. To me, this is like you know how boats are like this?
Yeah.
To me, this is like a flying boat.
Wow.
Yeah. Like it just goes straight up and I'm in like a flying mood.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I fly every week.
Sending everything out.
I think it's amazing that we get in giant metal contraptions and fly thousands of miles. It boggles my mind. I'm too stupid for that. I'm too stupid to understand how boats work. I like, you can tell me how boats work. You can tell me how planes work. I will still never understand how something that size can fly or even float in the ocean.
You're preaching to the choir. I mean, everything around me, I'm too dumb for it. Like,
yeah,
how does the phone work? How does the camera work? Like, how does the fridge work?
Yeah, music is crazy to me. Like how, like vinyl, like CDs. Yeah. How do they put it in there? I don't get it. I don't get how how you put a needle on it and it plays. Apparently it's because of the waves and it plays waves in your mind. I don't know. It drives me nuts.
The generation like us that grew up on CDs, like there's so many myths, like, oh, if you blow on the CD, it might start work.
Yeah, right. Same with video games.
Video games, the cartridges, and if you blow on them, floppy drives, USB drives. Right. I'm sure the people who invented it were like, what is going on? These kids are stupid. Okay, fantastic. What masterpieces and even better interpretations. Let's move into some of the closing questions.
Sure. What
are some books, movies, or role models that have strongly influenced you in your life? Even beyond wrestling.
So my favorite comedian of all time was Norm Macdonald. He passed away. And I read his book, which was an autobiography. Most of it wasn't true. But what was fun about that book was that determining what was true and what was fiction was very interesting to me because it was all very funny, but there were kernels of like darkness or genuine revelations that I could never tell. I mean, he kept the fact that he had cancer a secret.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So who knows what happened in his life that he kept close to the heart. And of course I respect him for that. I mean, so many people reveal so much I've revealed so much about myself, but when a person in the public eye can keep something that important to themselves until the day they die, it's incredibly inspiring to me. It's brave, it's courageous in my opinion. And people might think that's strange because how is it brave to not tell millions of people about something that happened in your life? But when you're in the position where you're like here, being interviewed every single week, podcasts, I mean, a lot comes out because you just talk. It's the same thing as therapy. You talk and talk and talk, and eventually the secrets come out. They spill out. It's just natural. So Norm Macdonald definitely is a huge influence on me. Of course, I talk about wrestling. Bryan Danielson, Sami Zayn, Mustafa Ali is an influence on me. Of course, I mean, The Undertaker was my favorite wrestler of all time. Of course he was, because I grew up in Saudi Arabia. Christian is a big influence on me. Edge. Oh yeah, actually CM Punk is a huge influence on me. As a kid, I actually was drawn to CM Punk because, and I played as him in all the career modes in SmackDown versus Raw. He was the first guy to ever come out on TV and say, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. And I didn't know what straight edge was. All I knew was that I was that.
Yeah.
I was a very devout little Muslim boy. And I had made the decision, I swore that I would never touch alcohol or tobacco or whatever. And I'm not nearly as devout now, but to this day, it's just not something that interests me. So even though I'm not part of that straight edge culture, I still kind of felt that association with him. And at the same time, once I sort of became a wrestler, especially in my early years, I consider CM Punk to be the, if not one of the best speakers and promos in professional wrestling history.
Yeah.
And I think you see his influence in a lot of younger guys like my generation in terms of less catchphrases, less shouting into the camera, and more deliberate, honest conversation with your audience. I mean, everything he says, you believe 100% because he says it with so much conviction. I don't know if he believes what he says, but it sure as hell seems like it. And that's, I think, the crux. Like, I studied acting, and that's all that acting is. Acting is just convincing yourself of what you're saying. And if you can convince yourself of what you're saying, you can convince millions of people of what you're saying. As far as movies go, boy, I actually don't draw that much from movies. Like some of my favorite movies are a lot of people's favorite movies. Actually, one of my favorite shows of all time is Twin Peaks. Fire Walk with Me is an amazing movie. I love David Lynch's work. I love Dale Cooper as a character. The problem, I think, is that a lot of the characters that I love in movies and TV shows are not really characters that I can reflect in my life. Yeah. Like, I want to be cool. I want to be badass. I want to be Darth Maul or Darth Vader or someone cool. I'm just not that guy. I just love having fun, and I'm too goofy, and I like to be funny. And, sometimes it's better to go with what you're good at than fighting against it. But who knows? One day maybe I'll be a badass that shoots lightning. I don't know.
Who knows? Fingers crossed. You never know. Yeah, great list. I just want to make a comment about CM Punk. So I don't drink and smoke as well.
Sure.
And when I watched CM Punk, it was the first time that I actually watched someone who was, straight edge. I don't know the meaning of straight edge as well, but also made it cool, right? Because the perception is always like, oh, you don't drink?
He doesn't drink?
Yeah, what a nerd or something of that sort. Right? Oh, how do you have fun?
Yeah.
But CM Punk was out there. He was cool, and he was the guy. And
he was confident about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I never ever wanted to to me, his best work was in the Straight Edge Society. I loved that stuff. I loved it because it was sort of an elaboration on his work on the indies. And the Charles Manson look, and God, I just loved it. And it got such great heat because nobody likes being told that you're better than them. You know what I mean? So when he would come out and say, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and that's why I'm better than you, or everybody raise your hand for the Straight Edge Pledge. Like, I get it. It's hokey and it's gimmicky, but I love it. I just love it so much because if you brought your family to a show and they've never watched wrestling before, CM Punk could come out and cut a promo and they would know exactly how to feel about him and they would remember him. You know what I mean? Like, it totally translates. And that's why it's hard for me when I tell people, they offer me a drink or they invite me to go to a bar and I say, oh, sorry, I don't drink. It's difficult for me because I don't ever want to imply that I think I'm in a more moral superior standard because of that. Exactly. It's just simply a personal choice. And, especially I went to college here in the city. And part of being in college is partying and drinking. I just didn't have that avenue to, socialize and make friends. So it's tough. You're kind of handicapping yourself. But at the same time, I think it's sort of one of those things where if you stick with your convictions, it can impress people. I think that's how it felt with CM Punk, where he came out there, and when you see a guy who looks like him all tatted up, and he says that he doesn't do any vices, it's like, wow, this guy's interesting. So yeah,
I agree. Okay, so that was your list. Your role models. Objectively, who was or is the greatest wrestler in WWE history?
Because you have to look at their body of work. Yeah. And you have to consider, when you say in WWE history, do you consider the stuff they did outside of WWE or just in WWE?
Yeah, let's make it easier, right? Let's say just in WWE.
In WWE, okay. So you got to think about the greats, Austin and Rock, are two of probably the most well-known wrestlers, and Hogan. But I would say in terms of the modern perception, Austin and Rock are the most popular, most well-known wrestlers. The problem is when you actually look at their runs, they were incredibly short.
Yeah.
Austin had like a 3-year run on top. Rock had like a 4-year run on top, and then on and off, coming back and doing guest appearances. Super short. And then you look at Cena's run, and it's like, God, it's like 12 years long, right? Roman has had like an 8-9 year run on top, way longer than the Attitude Era. You know what I mean? Shawn, God, if it wasn't for the fact that Shawn retired early, that's a huge stretch of time he could have been. You know what I mean? Like, because in my mind, when you just look at it in terms of pure, a mixture of promo, charisma, look, and work, Shawn is in contention for the greatest of all time. 100%. If not, I mean, he kind of is. When you just look at how good of a wrestler he was with how good of a talker he was, it's like nobody really competes with both of those levels.
Yeah.
But in terms of longevity and in terms of looking at someone's body of work and just taking a look at somebody who's done this for a long time and is consistently good, probably has to be Taker. And I know that's a safe answer, but it's a safe answer for a reason. I mean, personally, I feel like Taker really turned on in like 2005 in terms of like his work actually becoming like top notch. His character work was always awesome, but he was always hung up injuries or he wasn't working guys at a great level. And then in 2005, he was working guys like Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, Triple H. God, I wish he worked Cena at that time. Batista, I mean, Jericho, like guys who are really, really, really top notch. So I think it has to be Taker or maybe Cena. I think I'm going to say Taker. Yeah. Not a controversial answer at all, but it's my opinion.
It doesn't have to be. I think it's the right answer because he is in the talks or in the Mount Rushmore for the best of pro wrestling. And he brought up an interesting point. There's so many what ifs in wrestling. If Shawn Michaels didn't get injured.
God, if the thing with his back, like who knows how he would have been.
And The Rock, if he hadn't left and he had just stayed, he would have got like a decade in the industry. There's no question that he would have been the best. But because he left early, it was just always that question, right? Does that answer change if it's not WWE?
Yeah, probably. God, because when you look at the body of work that people have in Japan or in the UK or in Mexico, I don't even think I'm equipped to answer that question because I haven't watched all the wrestling from Japan and Mexico and the UK and everywhere else in the world. I can say that, I look up to Bryan Danielson so much because he just has a love for the game that I want, I mean, I have that love. I just want to reach that level of success that he had where he got to have his dreams come true wherever he went. You know what I mean? Like he got to do Wrestle Kingdom in Japan in the Tokyo Dome and he got to do WrestleMania in the main event in New Orleans and win the championship. I mean, that's just so amazing. And when you've reached the top of the industry in multiple territories, not just in America, but in the world, I think that's how you know you really made it. You look at guys who branch out and go beyond WWE like Jericho, Danielson, obviously. Brock Lesnar, I mean, went to a different sport. I mean, the UFC, MMA, and he reached the pinnacle of that industry and then came back with a completely different style, which is also incredible. And if Brock, who, by the way, is super underrated, if he was really in love with wrestling, God, I couldn't even imagine the animal that he would be. Like, the thing about Brock is that he's one of those guys who loves his privacy more than anything else and loves, I think, the business of professional wrestling. But bell to bell, he's so phenomenal. He's so phenomenal. I think he's one of those guys who was just naturally gifted. I can't speak. I don't know Brock personally. I'm sure he loves the business. Yeah. But what I mean to say is if Brock worked week to week, house shows, TV, God, I couldn't even imagine because the Brock that we saw on regular TV in 2004, 2003, 2002 was a Brock that was like 2-3 years in the business at that level. Oh my God, one of my favorite matches of all time that I forgot, Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker, Hell in a Cell, where Taker has that cast and the whole match, Brock's just ripping it apart and beating it up and Taker's grabbing Heyman, who's probably the greatest manager of all time, hands down, and pulling him into that. Oh, that's just a gnarly. We don't really see a lot of those anymore because we can't bleed in WWE anymore, but gnarly, just disgusting fights. Just throwing it out there. I mean, there's a lot of Joshi matches from the 80s and 90s that are gnarly like that. I'm thinking of one in particular where I don't remember her name, but her hand just gets crushed She was working, I think, Aja Kong or someone of a bigger stature. And that kind of style that you won't really see in WWE. And that's why I think it's important for the greats to work everywhere. And God, Taker, I almost wish he did a cup of coffee in Japan or, you know what I mean? Wouldn't that be awesome? I don't know. But yeah, that's
so many what ifs. Okay, last two questions. In what turned out to be his final appearance ever, the Ultimate Warrior said the following words: "Every man's heart one day beats his final beat. His lungs breathe their final breath. And if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others and makes him believe deeper in something larger than life, then his essence, his spirit, will be immortalized by the storytellers, by the loyalty, by the memory of those who honor him, and make whatever the man did live forever." In that spirit, what would you like your legacy to be?
You're asking me to speak my final words right now? I can't believe he said that and passed away.
Yeah.
Like the next day.
The next day. That's insane.
He must have known.
They must.
My legacy is simple. My legacy is my daughter and any children I have, and then whatever children they have, and their memory of me as a father and as a grandfather, and how I raised them and how I love them. That's the most important thing for me. As a professional wrestler, my memory is what I would like my memory to be is someone who people watched and can think of and remember until the day they die as somebody that they appreciated, hated, or loved. And I also, it would mean a lot to me because I would like to be a teacher of this. I would like to be good enough to the point where I can teach this to as many people as possible and open a school or be part of a school because that is so incredibly fulfilling for me is to teach. So if I can inspire people to become pro wrestlers, I think that is the greatest thing that I could do. Like I always said when I was in WWE, because I was kind of acutely aware that I was not fulfilling the standard that Saudi fans wanted me to be. What I always told people was, listen, I understand if you're frustrated with me as a representative of your culture because you don't feel that I'm authentic to it. But I will say this. If I can be in WWE as the first Saudi so that the second Saudi is better than me and the third Saudi and the fourth Saudi, then I will have done my job and I will be happy because I want that next generation. All I want is for me to be a successful Saudi in WWE so that Saudis in Riyadh, Jeddah, wherever can go to their parents and say, I know I can do this because look at Mansoor. And they can say, okay, yeah, you're right. If Mansoor did it and he comes from here, then you can too. All that matters.
Yeah, that's a great legacy to leave behind, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Final question. What do you think is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of all of this?
42.
Mansoor? 42.
Yeah, 42.
Hitchhiker's Guide.
Meaning of life is, I think it's just giving as much love as you possibly can into the world to the people that you love. And just, there's so much evil happening in the world right now, and it breaks my heart. And I feel so small because there's really very little I can do about it. And, you know, I look at my daughter and I wonder if she had been born a few countries over, if she would still be alive. And it's very difficult for me. And all I can really think about doing is whenever I am in the position to make someone's life better or make someone a little bit happier, then I will do that every single opportunity I have.
No, that's a beautiful meaning. The meaning of life is love. Love is always the answer.
It sounds cliche, but
No,
it's just...
It is. It's always true. I love that answer. Mansoor, thank you so much. If people want to connect with you, find out what you're up to, find out about your next shows, where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to any of my socials, Twitter, Instagram. I'm Suave Mansoor. It's a holdover from the male models thing. I can't change it because then I'll lose my verified badge. Whatever. I'm still the Sultan of
First
Suave.
world problems.
That's fine. It's SUAVEMANSOOR. And I have a link tree to all kinds of things, merch and Cameo. I can do personalized messages for you. I did a bunch for the holidays, which is super cool. And yeah, I got shows every weekend. So hopefully I'm coming to your town.
Yeah, go check Mansoor out. Mansoor, thank you so much. Shukran. It was an honor talking to you.
Artform, thank you so much.